it jumped up in value to 500 to 750 a pound.
So how much would you make on a typical haul in profits?
On 30,000 pounds, $5 million. I have a vision right now in my head of looking down through a valley between two mountains. As far as I could see were giant buds on tops of weed growing and shaking and blowing in the wind like this. No, dude, he opens my closet up and I've got these 4 by 3 foot deep by 4.5 foot tall safes.
Oh, my
6
goodness.
of them stacked in there on top of one another. $6.7 million cash.
How much?
$6.7 million in cash.
And was that all of the money that you had at the time?
No, hell no. There was more in the attic, but they never searched the attic.
We're going to have to cut that out of the beginning.
Yeah. Forget I said that, okay?
Are you ready?
Okay, so you ready?
Let's go.
I'm ready. Let's do this thing, man.
What's up, everyone, and welcome to the Wide Awake podcast. I am in Fort Myers, Florida, with Tim Mcbride. And Tim Mcbride is a former marijuana smuggler living on the edge of the Florida Everglades. From 1979 to 1989, Tim ran Southern Waters and the Caribbean with a band of modern-day pirates known by locals as Salt Water Cowboys. At a very young age, Tim became the boss of an operation that was responsible for smuggling roughly 30 million pounds of marijuana into America. Welcome to the studio in your house.
Welcome to my home. No, yeah, thank you for that introduction. That was awesome, man.
Thanks for letting me do it here.
Not at all. Glad to be here. Glad to talk to your viewers, your people out there. Give them a little bit of an education on the early Caribbean marijuana days, that industry. So,
I mean, just to start off, I want to know,
sure.
how long have you been growing that beard for?
I've been growing it since 2014, I believe, somewhere around in there. But, I always have the occasion to chop it because if I don't cut it, if I let it continue to grow, by this time I'd be, it'd be tangled around my shit and I'd be falling around everywhere and, tripping and shit. So, but the intention was not to cut my beard until I got my book published.
And just before we get into any of the main topic, I want to know, what were you like growing up?
Just an average, ordinary, everyday kid, man. I mean, I was just out of, my father was 82nd Airborne in North Carolina, paratrooper, jumping out airplanes, which is something I'll never do because if that bitch is landing, I'm landing with it. Yeah, so he wound up, as we got older, got a sales job in the Midwest. 4 years I went through high school in the Midwest in a town just north of Chicago, between Chicago and Milwaukee, called Lake Geneva, or Delvin, which is right next door, went high school there. And I had the opportunity at one time, fortunate to be asked to take a job with an entertainer at that time, and was part of a group of other Hollywood entertainers at that time called the Rat Pack. They were Dean Martin, they were Sammy Davis Jr., they were Joey Bishop. They were a couple of other guys that I can't remember off the top of my head, but my job specifically was working with Sammy Davis Jr., and I went out there for 2 years, and my cousin drove his tour bus. That's how I got involved in this, but that's a story to be read when you pick up the book and check it out. But that's where I was, earlier on. I just kind of fell into that, and once I got to understand how television worked and how movies worked, that bubble was bursted. I mean, that burst for me, so I never viewed television and film the same way. So I left there and I went back to Wisconsin, of all places, because that's kind of where I was hanging out growing up. 18, I was just turned 20, just going on 21, and I went back to Wisconsin. That's when a buddy of mine that I used to live next door to called me. He had living in Milwaukee at that time. That's when he gives me a call on the phone one day, and he says, "Hey, I'm moving to Florida tomorrow. I'm going to work with my brother and my brother-in-law and my sister. They run one of the only fish houses on this little island down there in the, up tucked in the northwest corner of the Everglades National Park, among this place called the 10,000 Islands." And he says, "And we live on one of these little islands, and I'm going to get a job on a boat that catches stone crabs." And I said, he said, "Did you want to go?" And I said, "Hell yeah, man, let's go." So I just packed everything in my Cobra, and off we go again.
And at that point, did you ever do any kind of work in that industry?
No, not at all. I mean, I was that kind of kid that had learned earlier on that if an opportunity or something that appeared to be opportunistic, came my way, I was the first one to jump on board and say, yeah, let's do this, because I never wanted to be that one guy or that person that said, damn, I wished I'd have done that. I never wanted to kick myself in the ass having said those words, so I just went and did it. Regardless, if it didn't work out, hell, I went back and started over again, just like I went to Hollywood. I went to LA. 2 years later, I'm like, screw these phony baloney, fuck this shit. I know this, I know what this is all about. So I left. I wasn't impressed by that.
It's not the kind of lifestyle that you like to live.
No, I don't, these people are just, they get up and they put their pants on like everybody else, and they go to work and they they portray someone else, someone else's who deserves the accolade that they're getting.
That's something that my focus is with this podcast is people ask me, what do you do and what do you focus on? And the way I always say it is, I don't want to speak to people playing someone else in a movie. I want to speak to the person that actor's playing.
Right.
How did you get into the smuggling business?
That happened rather serendipitously, let's say it that way, because I didn't go on this little trek to Florida with any aspirations of becoming, what I had become or get involved in what I became involved in. When I got there, and even prior to getting there, occasionally my brother or Mark's brother-in-law, they'd come to visit for summer vacation or whatever, and they'd tell these goofy stories, and he'd always had some good smoke with him, and so you hear these little stories, but when you get to the island finally, and you start hearing that a few more of these ghost stories is all they are, at that time. And, it goes through one ear and out the other, because that's all it is really, until you actually become one of those ghosts. And in my case, I went down there, not unprepared. I know that, Mark, my buddy that had invited me down, his sister and brother-in-law were building a brand new house at that time. So I knew that I could take a job as a tender. If I didn't give a shit, I'm a brick tender, I'm a block tender, I'm hauling bricks for the fireplace and blocks and like this, just helping out building the house. And during that time, we're coming to the end of crab season, and when they're bringing traps in and they're doing their thing. But Captain Billy had Mark working on the boat along with another guy who was from Michigan at that time. Well, crew changeover in an industry such as that is rapid. I mean, some guys work for 2, 3, 4 months and they quit and they leave. You don't ever see them again, because that work alone will make a man out of you.
Backbreaking work.
Oh Jesus, I'm talking about, yeah. I mean, at that time, and Billy that industry was very lucrative and very, active at that time. Stone crabs were being sold all over the world, because they only grow in those southern waters around Florida, in the Keys and in those areas, and particularly in the areas where we were fishing here on the southwest coast of Florida. Just an example, our little operation, I call it little operation, the captain and the 2 crewmen, between all of that, we're working 6,000 traps every season.
Can you tell me about the day that you started smuggling? How did you get into it?
Okay. That goes right pretty much hand in hand, and brilliant line of questioning, though. Thank you for making my job easier. The kind of work that it was, it only took him a week to break this guy's ass, and he quit. They worked him to death, and he just couldn't take it anymore.
So one of the guys that was working on the boat quit.
The guy that was
and you replaced him.
The Michigan guy. See, there was my guy Mark, who Billy knew he was Thorne's brother and Nancy's brother-in-law and shit. And the thing about it was you just didn't come to the island and get a job, without people going, who the fuck's this guy?
Because it was a very small place.
It was under 500 people
yeah.
between 2 islands, and everybody knows everybody. And if somebody comes into town that doesn't belong there, we know you're there, But you come and you stick around long enough, and you want to, prove yourself. You want to do the work, and there's captains that are not hauling pot. There are captains that are seriously, stone crabbers. And our business was serious. You had to do the work. You had to do the work during the day in order to do the work at night, because you can't just do one and not the other.
Because it would get very suspicious.
Well, yeah. How are you forwarding all the fuel for the boat? How are you paying your crew? Where are you going every day? With no crabs coming in, that kind of thing. So we had to do the work. the boat actually had to work in order to do the pot hauling at night. Well, this kid, they didn't know him. He was from Michigan. They didn't know anything about him, where he came from, so they just worked his ass to death, made him quit. And then that's when they said, Timmy, come on. We've got an opening on the boat. Come on, with you, me, and Mark, and, let's work. And that's when the scenario was imparted to me about where you wake up early in the morning, so before sundown, before dawn, and you do your thing. Well,
And you thought you were going to be stone crab fishing.
yeah, I thought, yeah, okay, here I go. I packed a lunch, and I got my crab boots, and I had to buy crab boots, and I bought the slickers and the whole, 9 yards, because you get wet, from the traps and the crap. That's all. I mean, it's nasty work, but it's tough work.
But as we know, that wasn't the case.
Well, no, I woke up, and typically it takes anywhere from 2 to 3 hours or whatever, because the boat's not, it's not a fast moving vessel. It's a large 51-foot, commercial fishing vessel. Obviously not designed for more power than it is for speed, and it would take anywhere from, 2, 3, sometimes 3.5 hours or so to get to where we needed to go. So we would get on at like 3 a.m, cast off, and I would climb right in the bunk, which was right in the wheelhouse, and I'd go to sleep until it was time to get up and, pull traps. Well, I woke up that first morning, and the sun's already up, and I'm thinking to myself, well, what they told me was that we start at, daybreak, and the sun's up already, and I leaned over, and I looked out of the bunk like this, and I looked up at Captain Billy, and he had this big smile on his face like this, and he says, guess what, Timmy? He says, we're not going to pull stone crab taps today, buddy. He says we're going to go offshore tonight. We're going to, screw around and, and swim and dive and, and jerk around and unload a pot boat from Colombia later on. I said, okay, cool, let's go.
And you were just fine.
I didn't have. There was, what could I do? It was nothing. They knew I'd be okay with it. You
weren't hesitant at all.
No, I said, let's go. It was like one of those tongue-in-cheek moments for them, because they already knew, my partner and the captain, Billy, already knew I'd be cool with it, but they didn't want to spring it on me until I actually got out there. And that's when they said, hey, guess what? So my first time ever working on that boat, I didn't even see a crab trap. I saw, we went later off that night and unloaded 15 tons off a boat from Colombia. It was 30,000 pounds we put on our boat.
30,000 pounds your first time?
30 pounds of Colombian redbud right from the jungle, man.
And as a kid, you must have loved that.
Yeah, I was just like, there were no instructions on how to do this. There's no playbook, you don't read up on how to unload a freighter from Colombia and then bring it into shore, that kind of shit, I was just thrown right in the middle of it. It was kind of funny, in the way in which it happened. But we brought that first 30,000 pounds in, and once we go out to the boat, a lot of times it isn't just pull up to the boat and they, the shit comes raining down on you and you're loading your boat and shit like that. It's a lot of times it's get up on this damn thing and help their crew get it from down below where they can comfortably throw it down onto us, you know, because they had to come across the Caribbean with it stuffed down underneath,
So people would transport it to you and then you would take it the rest of the way.
Right. Whatever corner of the Caribbean the boat was coming from, whether it had been Jamaica, Venezuela, Colombia, South America, Panama, Belize, Honduras, which was British Honduras before it came Belize, as well. Any of those, any country on the Caribbean rim that had weed available was where it was coming from. And we had connections in every one of those countries.
I think it's important to give some context to this because this was during the war on drugs in Miami.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So a lot of people that might be watching now, weed is more accepted and it's not seen as a hard drug.
Right.
But back then, the war on drugs was primarily for weed, right?
Yeah.
It was a big part of it.
It was considered by Reagan to be the scourge and the downfall of America at that time.
Can you just give us brief context as to what was going on in Miami at that time?
Right.
Why was there such a big war on drugs?
All through the 70s and into the early 80s was a huge influx of cocaine from South America into Miami. through the Bahamian Islands and those windward and other islands off the off the coast of Southwest Florida or Southeast Florida at that time. And what wound up happening was that there was so much cocaine coming into Miami that under the guise, a lot of it under the guise of one woman, she was considered at the time the godmother of cocaine. And she was actually the person who introduced and brought Pablo Escobar and Carlos Slater out of the gangs in Medellin. They were selling marijuana with the gangs in Medellin, brought them out of the gangs in Medellin, taught them how to gather the coca paste and create the cocaine hydrochloride, which they used to, as a conduit into the United States.
And what was her name again?
Her name was Griselda Blanco.
And how were people smuggling it in? Because people get very creative with this kind of stuff.
Right.
I mean, I watched a documentary, and a lot of the time they would put the weed under the boats as well, not just in the boats. There was like little storage facilities under. There was also, I know Pablo Escobar built submarines,
right,
which were just like the most dodgy things I've ever seen. And I mean, what other ways would people smuggle it in besides from boats?
That was primarily the preferred method when it came to cocaine, because the volume of cocaine was a lot less than the volume of marijuana. An equivalent amount of cocaine of marijuana versus cocaine would probably
in terms of money,
in terms of size, and value, $1 billion worth of cocaine would probably fill this little room we're sitting in here right now. $1 billion of marijuana would fill the entire housing complex that I live in. So, it made it a lot easier for them to use the type of subterfuge that you're explaining in the cocaine industry, because, using them under, putting them on and attaching them to the hollow boats. And then when the boat seems to be approached by an unintended vessel, they could let that cargo go and sink to the bottom, but still have radio contact with it. And eventually just push a button and it would float to the surface. And they could find it again, those types of things. They got very inventive in ways of doing that. The cocaine seizures went from, a couple 100 kilos to, tons at a time.
I mean, a ton of cocaine is worth, unbelievable
amounts of money. But at the same time, while that focus was taking place over in Miami, and Miami's local government pleading with the United States government to intervene in some fashion to help them with the problem that was created by the cocaine industry, our industry was flourishing as well, because the focus was more on that.
It was more on Miami
than what it was on us.
And you guys were doing it from some random town in Florida.
Some little town that had under 500 people, and half the town was involved in it.
And who were you working for?
He was one of my friend's fathers. Yeah.
In Colombia?
Oh, no. In Chokoloskee, in the islands, what was taking place was we were what was considered third generation pot haulers. We were the kids. The second generation pot haulers were our fathers and uncles and older cousins and grandfathers and people like that, who in turn learned that trade from the generation before them, which was, like I said, our grandfathers, and it was their uncles and their cousins and their older cousins and people like that. So as it was passed down from generation to generation, they put us kids out there working, because, the adults aren't the ones out there moving 800 to 1,000, 70 to 80 pound bales twice.
Getting the young kids to hold it.
Yeah, get the kids to do the work, man.
Hey, son, can't you just come over here and just lift that bale of marijuana for me, please? My back's a bit delicate today.
And that's pretty much how it was.
But who was the actual source? Where was it being grown? That's what I mean.
The majority of what we took or had brought into the country at that time was from Colombia. And it was taken from one family. First time I had worked for him, I didn't care who he was. I didn't even know it was his shit and his money I was working with, because I told the two guys in Miami, Carlito and Leo, the two guys I was working with, that I don't care who they are. I don't want to be introduced to them. I don't want to know them. You bring me their money, tell me what they want, and I'll put it on your doorstep. Because I was getting paid two different ways to do this scenario. One was to do it all. Cost you $175 a pound for me to go to wherever country you wanted your shit from, because I had a family connection there that I could get it for $10 a pound. $10 a pound.
So is that how much you were buying it for?
I was paying $10 a pound for it. So if this Colombian cowboy or this Cuban cowboy over in Miami had $300,000, he wanted 30,000 pounds of marijuana. I could literally spend $300,000 and buy him 15 tons of Colombian red. And by the time that $10 a pound material reached the United States waters, it jumped up in value to $500 to $750 a pound.
So how much would you make on a typical haul in profits?
On 30,000 pounds, $5 million. But out of that $5 million, I paid the crew that helped me smuggle it.
And how much was each member of the crew getting paid? Because this is a high-risk job. This is not
different amounts.
You're not working at the bank here.
Yeah,
you know?
no. They were getting paid really, really well.
Danger pay.
Yeah, danger pay. And even the minor jobs were paid very well, because I wasn't greedy. I didn't care. I was making millions. I mean, Jesus. Yeah, I mean, now we're getting into three different stories here about.
Yeah, let's actually go back before we get into that.
Back to the families where I was getting it from in Colombia, and that sort of thing. Well, they were generational. They were handed down to me by the families that I had taught me, and the families that had taught them, because the original family, the original pot hauler, was a man by the name of Loren Toch Brown. If you want to, look him up and find a very interesting and a very wonderfully kind man who was, at that time, were given a bit of an ultimatum from the United States government as far as his being one of the founding families in this little island area, whereby if you had taken somebody from one of the larger cities in North America, pull them off the street, there was some, stockbroker or whatever, lawyer or a doctor, whatever like that, take them and put them off in the middle of the Everglades on 41 between Everglades and Miami and say, okay, make a living. There it is. They die. That's literally what these people did. They found this place, made a home out of it, learned how to make a living from it, learned how to take the plumes for birds, because at that time in the 20s and the 30s and the 40s, the women in New York liked those big fancy hats with the plumes and the feathers out of them like that. Where in the hell was that coming from? Well, it was from people like this. No more alligator hunting, because they're, hunted them down to almost extinction or whatever when they used to hunt alligators for food. No more turtles. The nets had to be a certain size. You can only catch so many fish. And the national park had taken over, set their boundaries. And at some point in time in the 60s, early 60s, wanted to extend the boundaries of their park to include the two passes it took to get into Everglades and into Chokoloskee Island. They wanted that to be national park area that you had to pass through. Well, it was such a convoluted message and bullshit wording that they put together within the body of the language of the thing they were writing, the legislation they were writing, whereby you couldn't legally bring the catch that you caught through the national park. It had to come through some other way. Well, there are only two ways to get to these islands in any of the fish houses to process your catch was through Chokoloskee Pass or Indian Key Pass, and they were trying to make those national park. Well, they said, okay, you want to keep putting all these restrictions on us and making life difficult for us when we eked out a living and made this town possible and made it at one time the county seat of here in Collier County. It was that big of a deal. I mean, the town became something. And it was because of the original founders that had the balls to frontier this place. And now the government wanted to take it apart. That's when they said, okay, well, here you go. We found a way to supplement our income, if it were.
Yeah.
And that's kind of when it took over. And Toch was the original, went to Panama with his crew and up and around the corners into Colombia and up the rivers to find out where they were growing and how to do it and how to take it over. And it took him trial and error for a number of times and over the course of maybe several years and finally figured it out. He was one of the originals. And then he taught, he was coming into Miami at that time, in those early days. And then when cocaine started to become the thing, the two passes to get from the Caribbean to Miami area were the Mona and the Lisa, or the Windward and the Windward Pass. And they were becoming, watched over by the United States and the government because of the cocaine traffic. So he said, well, look.
Sorry, guys. We're
Yeah.
at Tim's house and he's got family.
Yeah, my little granddaughter's throwing a bitch, but
It's okay.
yeah. Speaking of these two passes becoming as clustered as they were, that's when Toch decided that, okay, we've got what we call the gap. The only other pass into the Caribbean or the Gulf of Mexico is between the western edge of Cuba and the eastern edge of the Yucatan. Why don't you bring this stuff over there, over to where I'm at in the 10,000 Islands? He says, dude, get that shit over there, man. We own it. I mean, you know, you've never seen such a thing in your life as this. And that's what started all the influx and the pot hauling and all this sort of, you know, this kind of thing. Which would bring us to your next query as to
how you got it, how you would store it. What was it like driving back with it?
There's a common misconception about, you know, those days and the pot hauling that was going on. And never once did I ever say, and will I ever say, that we were the only ones that were hauling pot. You know, we were the ones that did the most, you know, I mean, you know, we were it. But we weren't. There were a lot of guys and gals out there doing their share, you know, so a lot of them got busted, you know, I'm sorry to say. But a lot of them made it through, you know, and God bless you for doing your part, you know. But the story that I'm imparting is simply a story about a small town who learned how to integrate it into a way of life spanning these generations and running those southern waters and Caribbean with literally with impunity, you know. And the method by which it would work was simply, you know, like I said, our boat would go off and get its load. And a lot of times we've got as much as, you know, we could have as much as 40,000 pounds of shit on this boat. And at this point, we've got, you know, it's not hidden. It's not hide it down below and stuff it in the holes and that kind of shit. It's stick a bale of pot anywhere you can stick one on this fucking boat that's 51 foot long, because it's, you know, it's designed to haul crab traps, you know, and it's set up like that. I mean, very perfectly designed by that nature to haul bales of pot. You know, because you can stack them on there just like you can crab traps. And we had them on the bow as high as you can get them. We had them on the sides and up to the windows, just so maybe you can see out the windows. And on the top of the wheelhouse, we had them even stacked up there, as many as we could stack, just high enough so the radar could turn and do its thing.
Where would you sit?
On top of the pile. You know, the captain is in the wheelhouse. We never shoved anything in the wheelhouse because that's where the captain is now. Once we get the boat loaded and we turn away from this vessel and we put the throttle to this turbo 12 twin diesel powerhouse of an engine that's turning a 600 to 800 pound brass prop, and it's chugging this 40,000 pounds through the water. It's barely moving. It's moving maybe 4 or 5 knots, 6 knots at the most. And we always had a chase boat that what we called it was a chase boat riding along next to us. And that boat was there for our getaway. It was for our protection. And the captain in the wheelhouse, while he's dialed into the radar, you know, he's face down in that mask, and he's watching, and he's listening to radar, and he's checking it out. We've got a red light in the wheelhouse. So when you walk into the wheelhouse, you can still see, but the red light doesn't deter from your night vision. So when you turn around and walk outside, you're not blinded and you have to readjust to the light. That's why you see in a lot of movies when the submarine goes, you know, red light comes on, it's a night vision. It keeps their night vision so when they walk into our dark room, they can still see, you know, that sort of a thing. And the captain, he's dialed in. And if he happens to see within, you know, we had a radar that could go 50 miles. And if he sees a target within that range, he can keep an eye on it and watch it for a little while. And if it gets a little closer, he can shrink down to, you know, 45 miles, 40 miles,
you know,
35.
Coming for
and
you.
if it keeps coming a little bit closer, 20 miles, time to start thinking about getting off this goddamn boat because, you know, they've got it. We're not outrunning them. So simply the owner of the boat wasn't Captain Billy. It was his dad. So all he had to do, and this was pretty much the same with every vehicle and vessel and that we used, was that whoever was running it full to wherever never owned it. The owner was
so
never...
they weren't liable and they could get the boat back.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They weren't responsible for what that had been involved in, and ultimately, after it's been used as evidence, they'll get it back. which was a pretty smart deal.
No, it was brilliant.
Because we could get off this boat and there's this Scorpion that was, and there's a picture I'll show you of mine. It was a 600 horsepower that would probably do about 80 mile an hour for your butt even hit the seat. That's how we get away. Let them have it.
And did you ever have to escape police?
Never had to get away from them that way.
So they weren't really on it, eh?
No, we had our shit together too much, and the way we were working was at such a sophistication of level that we had pretty much all of our bases covered. And the older generations still had congressmen and senators and whatnot working within their little circles or what have you, until they all wound up going to prison, and then that's when I took over. But what happens is, once we've got our load and we're chugging back in, we bring it up into what's called the outer islands of the 10,000 islands. And if you Google 10,000 islands or do any kind of a search, web search, you'll see, and go to images to an overlay, and you'll see that this is a labyrinth of literally 10,000 islands. And it was built right in us kids' backyard. And it's 27 miles long by 3 miles wide, and it's just ins and outs and turns.
So there must be
and
very, very small islands,
blind waterways, and just very small. Some the size of this area we're sitting in.
Yeah, just like little beaches, basically.
And you can until you would get to the outer islands, then you start seeing the beaches. And you can have your own little spot on an outer island with a just perfectly ringed white sand and spend the day partying and picnicking and have an island for yourself to water ski around and just have the coolest time. It was a great place to live, a great place to grow up as a kid, but an even better place to haul pot to if you were trying to get, hundreds and even thousands of tons of shit in.
Because if someone was following you, they would just get lost in it.
Lost. And we've done that on purpose before. We've had guys chase us literally on purpose, chase the guys and have them lose them and sit 2 or 3 islands over and watch them because they don't know where the hell they are. They're not coming out of there, and then have guys just watch them and say, well, they're still there. They don't know how to get out of there. Just keep working.
How much money were you making at the beginning?
In the beginning, doing the job that I was doing, like the first 2 jobs I said I had to. The first 2 days I worked on that boat, I never pulled a trap. It was 15 tons the first night. But I didn't tell you, the second night I got on that boat, the day I got on that boat, we didn't work again. We pulled 22 tons that second night. So I was already at 37 tons of shit before I'd even pulled a trap, And I was given rookie pay, $5,000 per night, just because now that the captain understood he had a crew that was willing and able to do this type of work, my pay then from that point on went according to the size of the load. And I was averaging anywhere from $50,000 to $100,000 a night. I just turned 21, and we're working anywhere from 2-3 nights a week.
How would you store that money? I mean, you can't just go to the bank and say, here's hundreds of thousands of dollars.
No, we had.
So what would you do with it?
The older generations were very aware of the type of money we were making, and we were very, very aware that kids are kids and kids will be kids if they're not reined in. It was important for them to have us understand how absolutely important it was for us to grasp the fact of how to spend money and not have anything to show for it. What is the kind of stuff that you can buy that you don't have to take a receipt for? Well, there's certain things that you can do that don't allow you to do that. Plus, you can spend as much as up to $10,000 without the government or the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service, having to be made aware of it. And the business who you gave that money to having to declare it. You can spend up to $10,000. After $10,000, $10,000.50, $10,000.25, they have to report it. But up into that amount, you can pay and buy anything you want to, and they don't have to report it. So you're clean aware of that. But spending $10,000 at a time is negligible when you're getting paid hundreds of thousands. I mean, there's only so much shit you can buy. 22.2 pounds of hundreds, that's $1 million.
How do you know like how much money weighs?
Just by weighing it. I mean, a lot of people at that time were privy on how to weigh the money because regardless of the denomination of the bill here in the United States, it weighs a gram
But I mean, why weren't you just counting it?
because it took too fucking long. Dude, imagine. I mean, this was one of the reasons why, and this is some topic we would have talked on here sooner or later about. I'm spending ultimately, because of how, when we took over, we changed the whole industry. We changed how we were doing things. The loads actually got bigger because now they understood how to compress these loads into workable bales hard pressed bales that weren't coming at us like that in the early days. They were like somebody put their foot in the bag and taped it shut and then sealed it shut with burlap. And by the time we got them, a lot of them were like, shake was flying out of them and there was seeds everywhere in this shit, And then once that got cleaned up and learned how to make them all even, all the same size, and they were stacking and fitting perfectly, now the loads got heavier and the pace got bigger. So now my paydays go from a 30,000 pound, which was, by the way, I never saw a load that small ever again after that day. 30,000 pounds was just too small. It didn't exist. We were at 22. We were at 25. We were at 30. We did 55 tons one night.
Surely a boat can't hold 55 tons. Like a
Well,
small
the boat
boat
bringing it to us, I've seen as much as 200,000 and 300,000 pounds on some of these freighters.
They're big boats. Eh?
These are 400 feet if they're a goddamn foot.
Okay.
These boats. But, we're sending them to get loaded. These loads are paid for. We've got buyers in Miami that have already paid for the shit. We're just trying to get it from here to there to get it to them. So rather than send 25 boats to get this shit and, send one, this was in the earlier days when you could do this sort of thing. You could have a boat, with 200,000 pounds and approach it 2 and 3 times. Well, as the years went by and the sophistication of the law got just as sophisticated as we needed to be, approaching a boat more than once was really kind of something you didn't want to do.
So you would go back and forth and get
If it had 200,000 pounds on it, there was our boat, another boat, another boat, another boat, taking turns, going and getting the shit and unloading it over at this guy's place and at this guy's place and at this guy's place. It was actually one of us guys' jobs, and we did them in rotation to go around to each of these offload spots around the island, even in Everglades, and pull out the plants that had started to grow from the seeds that were coming across from the shit, that was being brought across the dock.
Oh, because the seeds would fall everywhere.
Seeds were everywhere, dude. This wasn't back when there was seedless pot.
Sometimes my mom smokes weed. I used to smoke weed, and when the seeds are lying around, I would take them, and we've got a really old next door neighbor, and I'd throw them over to their house and start growing everywhere.
See if they're viable, throw that fucker out there, But in those days, that kind of weed, the Caribbean weed, was seedy. The less seedy stuff came from Jamaica, which they call the virgin bud. Jamaicans called it virgin bud. Well, virgin buds typically means it's the female virgin bud, which everybody's growing in the States today, which is the cream of the crop. You want the female plant. You don't want the male plant. You keep his ass as far the fuck away from this plant as you possibly can because it will cross and contaminate it. It will never get to its full potency. So you deprive it of that pollination aspect, and they put all their effort into the plant rather than into seeding and propagating, repropagating themselves.
Did you ever visit the place where the weed was grown?
Oh, yeah. Shit, yeah.
What was that like?
More than once, man. I mean, phew.
How big were the fields?
Oh, I have visions. I have a vision right now in my head of looking down through a valley between two mountains and about maybe quarters up the side of the mountain, and as far as I could see, were giant buds on tops of weed growing and shaking and blowing in the wind like this.
Did you ever run through them with your arms open?
Oh, well, we didn't have to do it. I mean, that was to do that would have been, it was bad enough having to cross this guy's field to get to where we needed to be to see his next field, because just after a half hour of walking through this stuff, you could take it on your skin and roll into hash balls. That's how nasty, sticky this shit was when it's time to get picked. And, it was just crazy because, funny you should say that, and a similar type of thing would happen to us as we're unloading these vessels when we're, in the earlier days when whoever else was in control when I didn't have control, and I was working, as a crewman unloading a freighter. And like I said, it would be more than often we would have to get on that big freighter and help get the load out of the hole because, you got 200, 300,000 pounds in there. And a lot of times you have to build a pyramid out of the stuff for the guys to stand on and bucket brigade it up to the guy on top where he could reach somebody at the hole to pull it up on deck. That's how much.
So you're using the weed as a ladder to get to that other weed.
Yeah. Yeah, it was crazy because we're not using the hook and the crane and the nets and just screw that. It's a race against the sun to get the load that you can get with enough time to get back inshore, get this shit into, and then I'll tell you exactly how it works here in a second, to get that load out. But point being, as far as this part of the story goes, you'd have to take turns in the hole because the engines are running. They stoke 24/7. They don't stop. And this weed is becoming, and it's starting to, in a fashion, do what a pile of mulch would normally do, would self-combust. It's generating its own heat. And that fucking weed down there is this 200, 300 pounds of it's doing that. So it's your job to get it out of there as quick as you can. And it's literally work your ass until you puke. Get a drink of water and work till you puke some more. And then change places with a guy on deck who comes down and takes your spot. And you keep unloading until the job's done. And then you pull away and you bring the stuff into the shore where you kill the engines because you're running in the dark. And you kill the engines, and the shore crew's already in these islands. There's probably 25 or 30 of them, these smaller boats that are 25, 20 feet, 22, 25 feet. They're wide boats with shallow drafting bottoms on them. And the majority of them have twin 235 horsepower Evinrudes that have vertical and horizontal trim. So they can actually take those props and pull them up, right up to the bottom of the boat. And as long as that prop will make it through the water, that boat's going to make it through the water. So we can go through the shallows, and these guys got 30, 40 bales on them, and they're coming out like flies on a garbage can. There's 25, 30 of these, depending on if there's our boat and another boat and another boat loaded. There's 25, 30 boats coming and making as many trips to where we come from the little island, and literally put this shit and stuff it into 1, 2, or 3 of my buddies' houses that we've taken all the furniture out of.
So you would store it at your guys' houses?
Yeah, fill the house full. Bathroom, bedroom, dining room, kitchen, living room, playroom.
So where were your parents during all of this?
My parents lived,
far away,
1,000 miles away.
Did anyone ever just walk into that place and just be like, what is going on here?
Never happened. Because like I said, you don't just walk in there and nobody knows you.
There's people watching, yeah.
And because there's everybody, half the town's involved with it. The other half of the town is not stupid, but they're your neighbors. They're your friends. We're not shooting guns. Never once in the years that I did this, did I ever see a gun but one time. Once, and it was never fired. It was just shown to me, pretty much handed to me, and I was just carrying it. That was my first trip to Colombia. That's a funny trip. I'll tell you about that one. But this is the scenario about how it all worked. You get it into this house, and some of the vehicles that would be driving this stuff the next day during the broad daylight when the sun comes up is when it makes its way to Miami. So from sundown to sunup is when it makes it to the island. From sunup to sundown is when it leaves the island in broad daylight, because we were masters in what they had called masters of hide in plain sight. Who in their right mind would ever expect, coming out of a town of just under 400 people, 40,000 pounds of marijuana is being run out of that town all day long? Who would ever? Nobody ever expected it, so it just happened. Like in 9 times out of 10, my guys are waving at the law as they're going by. The sheriff, hey, how you doing?
Did you ever feel bad about how much money you were making? Because you get people that work their whole lives and don't see that kind of money.
It was never perceived in that context, to be honest with you. But now that you're sitting here trying to, trying to make me feel ashamed of.
No, that's not what I'm trying to do. That's not what I'm trying to do. That's not what I'm trying to do.
No, I understand. I'm just I'm just shitting with
It was
you,
just
man.
a question
No,
that came
it's a
to
valid
mind.
question.
Yeah.
It's understandable, and coming, and I've never quite viewed it from that context, but it's an interesting way to view it, but in retrospect, had I been able to, honestly and without inhibition, share more wealth than I was sharing at that time without being ridiculously noticeable, I mean, I would literally be driving into town to go to a club with a buddy of mine whose truck that I didn't really want to show up at the club in, and without trying to insult them in any way, say, dude, pull into this dealership right here, this Nissan, and I know every dealer that was selling cars in town, and dude, pick out a truck, pick out whatever truck you want.
And you just buy
within
them a
5
car.
minutes, we'd drive out of there with it because the owner knows me. He knows I'm good for it. I'll come back and pay for the fucking thing, or I'll give him cash right there for the damn thing. And he knew that if it was more than $10,000, how to go about depositing the money that I gave him for the purchase.
Different times they would deposit it?
Yeah, every day deposit a little less than $10,000. If it was a $20,000 truck, in those days trucks weren't very expensive. We're talking about 80s. If you spent $30,000, you were buying a mammy-ass truck, Excuse me, but...
So you were taking care of the people around you?
I would take care of people, And if I had literally back the money that I had given away to people, because I give money away without ever expecting to get it back. I don't want it back. I got enough, I'm trying to make room in my attic for more, But this wasn't what I was imparting to them. It was just... Tim being Tim, not for any pat on the back or just, any accolade of any kind, just because I felt like doing this for my friend. And I carry that same type of, integrity with me with regards to this story. I'm just one cog in a very giant wheel, man. I can tell you about my point of view of it and how it all worked for me. And how I perceived it all taking place. But I guarantee if you talk to one of my other crew guys or anybody that had any significant involvement within the inner workings of, and, the sophistication of which it was we were doing, could offer you a fresh, different, far different point of view other than the one I'm giving you, which is an amazing thing about this. And one of the more interesting things about the story is the simple fact that for nearly 40 years, no one within this United States had any idea whatsoever that Everglades City and Chokoloskee, between the two of them, just under 500 people, was the international marijuana smuggling hub of North America.
And you were at the center of all of it.
And I tripped and fell right in the middle of it. That type of recognition or accolade, for lack of a better word, was not given to them until this history became, fact.
Yeah.
And it was, my story is just one of several stories that come out of there because, when you talk about, when people make the analogy by saying, it takes a town or it takes a village, to raise a person. Well, in this case, it literally takes a village
to raise a crop.
To raise everybody's expectations with regards to the demand. It wasn't like we were shoving this shit down anybody's throat.
Yeah.
It was just, 20, 30 tons, 40-ton loads was all we knew as kids. We didn't know anything any different. We didn't know there were smaller amounts, available to us.
What was the best part of that job?
The best part of it?
What was the best part about smuggling marijuana?
I think running offshore to offload a freighter.
You just love the process of getting
the anticipation of, the type of stuff that you might come across, or just the crazy ways by which I've seen it come into this country. I mean, I have literally seen it come in so many fucking ways it would blow your mind. I mean, I've seen it come, like I said, on freighters that were 400 feet long that you couldn't even, their rails were so high you couldn't even throw a rope up to them. They were that high. You couldn't tie off. Captain had to stay right there next to them. I've seen it packaged in so many different ways and so many different ways, uses of packaging itself. We were moving literally so much cannabis out of South America that we had gone from what was originally being used, which was prevalent because Canada's one of its major exports is coffee. A lot of the burlap bags that this stuff was pressed into had coffee insignias on them as they're stitched shut. Well, all of a sudden we stopped seeing coffee bags, and now we're seeing the more modern take on the burlap, which was the nylon kind of a mesh that almost looked like a burlap type of affair, but it had Purina, which is like Purina dog chow. You have this in your country?
I have no idea.
It's a brand of dog food.
I don't think we have it.
It's a brand of dog food, just to say for those of you that aren't aware of it, that's made here in this hemisphere for your pets, your animals. We always knew it as Purina dog chow you buy for your doggy and your cat at home, or, Purina cat chow, or, something to that effect. Well, all of a sudden we're seeing these giant bales that are packaged in these burlap bags that say Purina monkey chow or Purina horse chow, or some of them had Purina lion chow. Well, we didn't realize or know even until that period in time that Purina company made chow for zoos. They're selling zoos, piles and piles and bags of lion chow, elephant chow, cow chow, zebra chow, all this stuff. And now we're getting their bags. They're running out of coffee bags. They got to start taking them from, Purina. And it was just that way. It was just so much stuff coming out of it. It was coming. I've seen it come in, even the guys we were working with the Ethiopian Zion Coptic Church out of Jamaica. And their religion obviously was, their part of their religion was to smoke ganja. Even the little kids, this part smoking ganja was just part of the way of their life. They were running out of material to package their shit in, because there was a point in time at which, during this early 80s where the Jamaican government was solely dependent on the exportation of ganja. That was their main export. That supported the country. And that carried on for a number of years until they got to a position where they needed, aid of some sort from the United States in some fashion or another. That's when the United States government said, okay, yeah, you clean up this ganja crap. Yeah, we'll help you out. Well, they had to stop the transportation of ganja, but there was so much coming out. I've seen it packed in Marlboro boxes. Marlboro cases.
Cigarette boxes.
Marlboro cigarettes. You know what those are?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. In literal boxes that said Marlboro. They looked like a giant pack of Marlboro, but within them was the weed was packaged in brick forms, but it was bricked in there like Marlboro boxes. It was just craziness how we've seen this stuff come across.
During your time working as a smuggler, I'm sure you had quite a lot of near-death experiences. Did that ever, did you ever have a time where you were like, this is it, I'm going to die?
No, you know what? And it's interesting you should say that, because I had done a documentary for Viceland. I know if they've played Viceland in South Africa.
Vice News, yeah,
Vice, yeah. Mm. They had done a shot here in Everglades with me for 3 days doing a documentary on my story. And they asked me that very question. And the only retort that I have to it is simply, I never, in the whole time of ever being involved in this, did I fear for my life. The only time I ever feared for my life was when the United States government got involved in it. And they were the first ones that ever aimed a gun at me.
So you were only scared of them?
I was always scared of them. I was never really afraid of them. in the sense of being, ooh, but always cognizant, aware that, we were doing things right. We were doing things proper. And we always had our bases covered when it came time for, say, we got, 6 or 8 at one time houses literally loaded, slap full on that 129 acres. There's literally 9 houses stacked as full as you can get them with bales of weed. And we're running out of there. And it's hard for me to imagine that, an entity that is supposed to be that aware and that keen on what it is they're doing, not really understanding that and not realizing about, the magnitude of that which is going on. And they had no clue, which was what made
It's kind of unbelievable, hey?
It is. It was which kind of made it kind of rather easy for us. But we always knew that they were there. They have their own little sources and their ins and outs and their little ways of catching people, which is obviously how we ultimately got, wound up getting our just dues. But there was, it was incredible that how, when I describe our crew as being anywhere from, a half a town, 250 plus people involved at one way or another. But when you start working other towns and islands and crews up the coast, and there were 4 others, there was Goodland Island, there was Marco Island, there was Naples, and there was a Pine Island crew. And each crew has anywhere from 50 to 60 people at least or more working at one time. Because when we're unloading these boats, like they're parked out there like a parking lot, man, we can't get to them fast enough. We've got 5 crews working on this stuff trying to get it in. That's literally how much stuff was coming into this United States through South Florida. Nobody had a freaking clue. It's just, even still to hear it come out of my mouth like that.
That's the thing that I wanted to say was that it doesn't, like, when you talk about quantities that you were carrying and transporting, it doesn't really, your brain can't fathom it. Because when most people buy weed,
right,
it's in a little banky.
Yeah.
You don't think about where it comes from, how it got here. Like a 40-ton load or a 10-ton load.
Yeah.
That's just, that's enough weed to last 100 people 10 lifetimes.
Exactly.
But you were mentioning a trip to Colombia just now. I want to know, what was the craziest trip you ever went on to Colombia or during your time as a smuggler?
That really would have been my first trip to Colombia. It was to, excuse me for that. I have to take a bit of a sip.
Synchronized water break.
Yeah. When I first started working with my 2 partners in Miami, Carlito and Leo, they were actually the only 2 people I ever wanted to meet in Miami. Like I might have mentioned this earlier, I don't want to know anybody. Just bring me their money. Tell me what they want. I'll go get it. I'll give it to you. You give it to them. Do whatever you need to do, and then you pay me, that kind of thing. Well, they had, the first time I had met them, first time they had met me, it was a bit of a test thing for them. They wanted, and it was another small load. It was 32,000 pounds, I think, or something like that.
Tiny, yeah.
Yeah, well, in our realm of, of world, that was small.
Yeah.
And, because I have literally dumped out of my boots more than 10 people can smoke in their lifetime. That's just cleaning up, But, they wanted somebody to go down, purchase themselves, make sure it's good product, weigh out the exact amount they want. They wanted me to be the one to personally take care of it.
Or traveling back and forth.
To go to Colombia and buy it and purchase it and do the whole, and I charge 2 ways. Like I said, $175. I'll go anywhere in the Caribbean you want because I have a connection inherited that way. Or you can go anywhere in the Caribbean and buy yours for whatever you can get it for. If you can get it, you won't get it for less than I can get it for, I'll guarantee you. But you can, you're more than welcome to do it. And I bring your boat out here, tell me what latitude and longitude to meet you and when to meet you, and I'll take it from you and give it to you for $145 a pound. I'll do it that way. But most opted for me to do the whole thing because it was easier for them. There was no sweat off of their, behinds for that. So, that's pretty much how that would take place, and whatever country they wanted, which would be where I would get it from, But, during that scenario, there was always, like I say, there's always a safety valve of some sort built into this scenario. And I've never put myself in a position where I have no way of exactly and responsibly accounting for anything that may or may not happen to your stuff along the way. If I'm sending my boat to Colombia to buy your stuff, or I'm going to Jamaica, I'm going to Central America, wherever I'm going to buy your stuff, one of your people is going to be on my boat with one of my guys who's only on that boat. He's not there to touch the weed. He's not there to help stack it. He's not there to do anything but count the number of pieces that get put on that boat of yours. And while your guys counts, while my guy counts. When they both have the same count, we leave and we come back to the United States. When I get your shit to Miami and you start counting your shit and I start counting my shit along with you and our count works out, I didn't take any of your shit, you didn't take any of my shit. So we all trust one another. There's always a thing built in there.
You might have smoked it a little bit on the way, though.
Oh, yeah, but that's negligible, man. You got to do that. That's funny, too. That's because, I mean, that was our job as growing up as I did, going offshore to unload these freighters. That part of our job coming in was to test the shit.
Make sure it was good.
Because if it was killer shit, you got to tell the guys on the crew, help keep some of this stuff, man, Because like a bale or two here and there was that was never any law. I mean, that wasn't, who cared?
Yeah.
We're stacking it on this boat, like you said earlier, so much that if there's any kind of a sea out there, one or two or three is going to roll off, big deal. You just made millions of dollars off of nothing, really, as an investment. So you're going to piss ass about, 5-10 bales or some shit, but.
So you were saying about the craziest trip.
Yeah, the craziest trip. So I go down there, and I said, okay, yeah, I agree to fly down there. So between the three of us, Carlito, Leo, and myself, we had purchased it was rather cheap, but it was only about, I don't think it was even quite $3 million. We bought a corporate business Learjet. It was 3 years old. It wasn't bad. It was beautiful.
So you bought a jet to fly back and forth?
Yeah, to fly back and forth out of a private airstrip. There's a lot of air parks, they call them, in Florida. They're homes that are built with air parks in them, so you can land your jet or land your plane and pull up to your house with your own hangar. And there were a lot of those in South Florida, and we had a house in one of those where we kept our jet. And the flight to South America is only 5 hours, depending on, tailwind or headwind or whatever like that, 5.5 hours. I could literally get on the plane real early in the morning, stay at the house that night, get on the plane all tired, crawling a bunk on the plane at, 4 in the morning and be there by 10 o'clock in the morning, spend the whole day doing what I need to do and fly back and be sitting across the bar from my girlfriend in Naples by 9 o'clock that night. She'd never know I left the country. It was just done that way, and then that first time I flew down there, I didn't meet the boss, the guy who owned the plantation and who was in control of all the growers within his region, within his reach, which was almost the entire northern coast of Colombia, damn near it, because he was rather connected. He wasn't a cartel by any way. He was a family or a family guy who inherited all these different growers in the house and the mansion that he lives in from his father. So we fly on down there. I don't meet him that first day. I take a buddy with me named Ruben who speaks Spanish because I don't speak a lick of Spanish, and this guy doesn't speak a lick of English. So between the two of us, I've got my interpreter and he's got his. And excuse me, we're put in an apartment at the back of the house, which is probably 4 times bigger than 8 times bigger than this place. It's huge. And, we have our own personal chef who came in and made us dinner, and women waiting on us hand and foot, and anything we wanted. And so we wake up the next morning, we have breakfast there. They're sweet. And, excuse me. Yeah.
The cough always makes it worse, right?
Yeah.
You always get 10 times more high after the cough.
Yeah, so we have our breakfast and it's almost lunchtime, so it's time to meet the boss. So we go downstairs and we meet Rico, his right-hand man, and here comes this guy bolting in through the front door, and he's he's 5'2" maybe. He's not very big at all. He's got jet black hair pulled back in a ponytail, and He's got a side belt on and a sidearm, and he's got fatigues on and got combat boots, but he's got a T-shirt on. And I'm watching him come through the front door, and he's blah, blah, blah. He's just a jolly old fella, man. He's just having a good time. And he's talking Spanish. Nobody understands what he's saying except my guys and his. And he walks, and on the front of the T-shirt, there's a smiley face. And underneath it, it says, "Have a nice day," you know. So he goes, "Oh, they do," walking past me, and I see on the back of his shirt is that very same smiley face with a smoking bullet hole in its forehead, and it said, "Or else," underneath of it, you know. Excuse me. So I'm thinking right away, this guy, you know, he's already got my sense of humor down, you know. I like this guy already, right? So he starts blah, blah, blah about this in the house and how his family owned it and how that, you know, it was a really cool setup, man. It was set up in such a way where, you know, I described it in my book by his father, you know, of course, being in the business that they're in, you know, even in earlier days, it was a bit of a shady business where he had the house built in such a way where you could be going down a stairwell that goes nowhere. It'll take you to a dead end. And if you follow your way back up and you take the wrong turn going up, it'll take you to a doorway that'll take you outside that you can't get back in the house in. Or it'll take you to a false room, or it'll take you, this stairway will take you all the way around and bring you right back out to the same room you came in. That house was designed that way, so only the people in the house know the right way to go. So if somebody were to come in that house and attack you or try to, you know, kidnap you or whatever, you would know which alleys or which staircases or which hallways to take. They wouldn't know. They'd be running all over, going all over the house, going different places and not finding your ass because you're already gone and they're still in there farting around trying to figure out that maze that you just left. It was a cool house. His father was a very intelligent individual. It was actually modeled after an Indian and a castle over in India that at some ancient, I mean, this is like 1,000 years ago. This guy built his house for that reason, to confuse his enemies. He took that from that guy, which I thought was very cool. But
yeah, that's awesome.
But we, you know, we don't hang out too much with the guy, and he says, "Well, you know, that's enough of that." You know, the guy's interpreting, and let's go see what you're here to see. So we all run out of there, and that's when they grab he grabs an AK, Rico grabs an AK, my guy grabs one, and I'm like, "Oh well, fuck."
Like a gun,
AK-47.
Yeah,
and I grab one too. You know, I mean, never had a gun in my life, never needed one. So I figured, oh, what the fuck? If they grab one, why not? I better, you know, because I'm in Colombia, I'm in a jungle, you know, what the hell? I'm not going to kill anybody, obviously. I'm just going to, you know, do whatever because, you know, I'm not that guy. And it turns out that we just get, you know, we drive for about 10 minutes and we get to this spot. And as soon as Rico, his partner, opens up that front door, the most awesome smell of burlap and Colombian weed smacked me right in the face, brother. I could smell it, man. And you know what? And to this day, if anybody, I mean, if any of y'all can figure out how to make a cologne that smells like that.
When I was younger, I used to, back in my days, back in the good old days when I was 4 years ago, I would take little perfume.
When you were younger?
Yeah, I would take perfume bottles from my mom. And I would put a bit of water in them and then stick some good weed in there and spray it on me. But it never got the smell.
Oh, wow. That's crazy. Yeah. That's crazy. But, yeah, so, I mean, you know, I'm enjoying the smell and we get out and, you know, and I'm pushing my way through these giant leathery leaves, man. And we come to this, what looked like an Incan ruin. I mean, it's bales of weed, blocks of bales of weed stacked maybe 10 feet high. You know, they're probably 25 feet wide, and they probably go 50, 60 feet, each of these rows back into the jungle. Here's a row, here's a row, here's a row. He's got, I mean, tens of thousands of pounds of this shit, and they're pressing it. They're packing it into bales, and it was my job as I'm there buying to actually, he had given me a 6-foot piece of bamboo with a piece of pipe in the end of it. And the end was cut, you know, kind of vertically like this, or, you know, so I could, like a hair hypodermic. And I would stick these bales as I'm going along and use his pipe to test it. And I say, "Oh, that's nice and sweet. It's good. It's nice. I like that. How many of those you got?" And he's like, "Kick 200 or 300 of them down." And I'd spray a particular mark on them. The guys would continually take them and weigh them. So when I had gotten to the weight I was there to get, we'd end the day and we go back to the house and we party, right? And we'd have because we're leaving tomorrow. So we get back to the house and, and we're at the apartment and we're taking a shower and, we're relaxing. We got some time before dinner. And of course we've got, they've got bowls of cocaine laying everywhere around the house. And I'm not a big coke guy.
So were they dealing other stuff and growing other stuff as well? They weren't just doing weed?
No, his entire operation was weed, strictly weed.
But he liked cocaine.
But yeah, I mean, they all liked cocaine. I mean, everybody was doing it at some point or another, but that wasn't his main business because he, first of all, the area in which he was working was really too close to where the Cali was operating, which was not too far from him. But the Orwella brothers, who were originally with the Medellin cartel, and I got this wrong in my last cast. I misspoke the name. The Orwella brothers, Rodriguez Orwella brothers, had left the Medellin cartel when Pablo became an idiot and started shooting airliners out of the sky to kill congressmen, and they weren't even on the damn thing.
That was the craziest
They
thing
left
I
and
heard.
became the Cali cartel, the Orwella brothers. My guy that I worked with, was their cousin. So he had that association, but he was never in that industry. That's a whole, to him, even that was a whole, we didn't want to get involved in that thing because that's too volatile. What he was doing was perfect. And he had guys like me. You don't get a better arrangement than a guy like me. I show up with cash and I don't leave without having paid for the stuff. You can't imagine how many pot haulers there were in those days that would take the load and not pay for it yet. They can't afford that. 15 tons, a little over 150 tons that I was buying at any one time. That's $55 million.
You started off as a low level in this operation, right? And you, like you said, you slowly built your way up. How did you become the boss? Because you became, if I'm not mistaken, the boss of the whole operation.
Yeah.
How did that happen?
It had happened it precipitated during that time when I had mentioned we had worked 28 nights in a row. I don't know if I had told you this or not.
No, you never told me that.
Well, there was a point at which we'd worked 28 nights in a row. And there were guys that I had talked to that would say that it was more nights than that, but I left it at 28 nights that we had moved no less than 25 tons on that island and through that little town every single night for almost a full month. The houses got full during the day, they got emptied, or during the night, they got emptied during the day, they got filled during the day, they got emptied and back and forth, and the whole town is doing this. Well, during this run of 28 nights, we had done one, and I mentioned this earlier, at 55 tons. 110,000 pounds we brought in one night just to see if we could do it. It wasn't about the money after all. It was about just getting it done, getting the work done. Excuse me. So, you can't always work the same guys. Like our boat would work one night, 2 nights, maybe 3 nights, and then you got to take some days off, man, because
it's heavy work.
Like I said, yeah, not only are you doing the stone crabbing during the day as subterfuge to what you're doing at night, you got to do both jobs. Just stone crabbing will make a man out of you. Jesus, but you add this other shit when you're moving 800 or 1,000 bales a night. Dude, that'll make an extra man out of you. But you can't do that. Can't keep doing that. That's why everybody has to be involved. That's why you got so many people working so we can take a break. Well, the last night I worked was that 55-ton night. And I just, the next day, I woke up, and I was, it's all good. I don't have to work and this kind of shit. I don't have to go crabbing or anything like that. And I get back to, I get up and I decide maybe I'll walk over to one of the houses and see how it's going. How the shore crew's doing. And they're doing their thing. They're unloading vans and cars and shit, and you kick them on the bumper like that. Well, the guys that are driving this stuff on the road after we brought it in, we have our escape with that chase boat I alluded to. Well, the guys on the road who are actually driving, and there could be anywhere from 40 cars, trucks, vans, Broncos, you name it, whatever you can stick a pail of weed in. Just a regular, normal car, you can get 11 bales of shit in just to get it gone. That's why most of the town gets involved, and a lot of the ladies in town get involved in driving this too, because it's 15 grand a trip if you're hauling a van, and that's 15 grand, or it's 30 grand a trip, and that's 15 grand to the driver for one trip to Miami and back. That's 4 hours of your day. So as I'm having this day off, I can remember during my last day off, I was given a wrecking bar and a chainsaw, and so was my buddy Jimmy, and this guy Daryl, who was one of the 5 brothers, Daniel's brothers I told you about. He points at this Winnebago, brand new, 40 foot. It had 125 miles on it. Most of those miles were getting it from Fort Myers back to Everglades, where it came from, where they bought it from. And he said, I need you and Jimmy to go in there with this wrecking bar and chainsaw, and I need you to cut and gut everything from the windows down. Get it the hell out of that thing. I mean, tear it out of there. From the windows up, like the cabinets and the mirrors and the curtains and everything like that, leave that shit there. And I said, okay, no problem. So we go in there and we fire the chainsaw up in the wrecking bar. We even took the chairs out, the captain's chairs, the driver's chair and everything. I mean, we took it all. They put airbags in the springs and inflated them so that when they put 11,500 pounds of bales in this thing, it wasn't going to spark the highway on the way to Miami, so
Wouldn't bottom out.
It sat nice and staunch like it was supposed to, just like it was empty. And me, like a dumbass, I go over to check the house out, how it's doing, and they got this van loaded, it's ready to go, and Daryl's trying to figure out how to get it over to Miami. And he sees me coming. Now, I've been doing this for a number of years now, and he knew me, that, these bosses, these guys they know who I am. And because I work offshore, I unload their goddamn freighters and shit, their jobs and stuff. And he asked me, he said, Timmy, I need you to do me a favor if you wouldn't mind. And I'm thinking, oh, God, I know what he's going to ask me. He asked me if I would drive that Winnebago to Miami for him, because it couldn't go to, what we typically do, the scenario by which this whole thing works is typically the cars and the vans and the trucks and the pickup trucks and those things that are typically loaded like that will drive to a plaza or a strip mall somewhere in East Miami off of what's called Chrome Avenue, a little town maybe east of Miami or west of Miami called Kendall. Pull into a plaza or a strip mall or something like that, where we'd have another guy that knows us and the drivers and everybody, with the people who actually own it, the Cubans from Miami. He'd be standing there with a guy going, well, that's our car just pulled in, that's our van, that's our truck. And he's pointing out all these different vehicles of ours that are pulling in. Our people get out, their people get in, they go drive it to wherever and unload it and bring it back empty. Our people get back in it empty and go load it again if there's time to do it. So there's always a separation between the guys in Miami don't know where it came from, and the guys in Everglades don't know where it's going in Miami, so nobody can tell on anybody. And even if our guys got caught in our own vehicle, which they never do because we've got an out for them guys as well, everybody driving, we got our boat that can get us off. We've got no less than 8 or 10 to 12 guys and gals whose only job is to drive to that plaza and back to Everglades all day long. And they're always staggered, 12 of them driving. So there's always somebody on the road, where if one of these drivers that's driving a load to Miami gets stopped, all he has to do is, now you're 1,000, maybe 2,000, maybe a little more heavier than you're supposed to be, and you're a van or you're a truck. Well, you wait till whoever stopped you to get between you and your vehicle, throw that bitch in reverse and hammer down on it and take that front end out of his car, man. Because, just knock the shit out of it, man. And put it in drive and haul ass. Because he's not going to chase you. Because he had it, man. His car's had it. But you can't outrun his radio. All you need to do is get out of sight of him in one of our spotters and get out and get into one of our spotters' cars, and you're gone. Because before you got stopped, you were already on the radio calling me or calling whoever, saying, hey, whoever owns the car, blah, blah, blah. We've already called them. They've already been on the phone with the cops saying, hey, dude, I just looked out the driveway. I noticed my car's been gone, and my truck's gone, my van's gone. I think it's been stolen. And like you said earlier, and they get it back.
That's crazy.
It relieves them of that, responsibility. But, there are different pay scales for different parts of the operation, like you asked me earlier, how it all worked. Well, going offshore and unloading these freighters is the most lucrative of the pay scale. And I just fell right into that. I had no idea. I'm making, like as much as, like I said, $100,000 a night. The next guy who's making any kind of money at all would be the guy that owns the home that you're packing the stuff into. He can make, $50,000, $75,000 just for letting him use the house for a few hours overnight. And then you've got the guys that are handling the bales, that are moving those. Those are $5,000 each. Everybody that's moving and handling and tossing bales, that's $5,000 each. Then you've got the guys that own the vehicles that you're driving. They're getting paid anywhere from $15,000 to $30,000 a vehicle. Out of that money, then you pay the guy or gal that's driving for you. And then from there, it goes to the spotters who are paid $10,000 every single day just to drive. You've got to
watch out.
To keep a watch out. If you get stopped, they'll pick you up and they'll take you home.
So how did you end up becoming the boss of the operation?
Okay, and that's perfect because this is an excellent segue right into that question. That van that I had serendipitously wound up being chosen to drive to Miami. I was the butthole that had to get in there, and because there was no seat, we'd actually taken a bail out so somebody could get down in between there and drive the damn thing, and it wound up being me. Because the owner of the stuff, the guy whose job it was, had called me and asked me, Timmy, he said, I need to, well, like I said, I had to ask you a question. I'm thinking, oh, God, here we go. Well, he wanted me to drive this because he needed somebody that he could absolutely trust. And that was only because it wasn't able to go to the spot where everything else was going, to this plaza, because you get within 40 feet of this damn thing, you can smell it. I mean, it's got, 11,500 pounds of, shit. It's almost got 6 tons of weed in it. It had to go right straight to the house. There was no exchange in drivers or anything. You had to go right, to the house with it. And in order to do that, you needed to be trusted, absolutely trusted. But not only was I to take that over there, but I was there to spend the day. And when the load stopped coming for that day, then I would drive a car full of money back to them that evening. That's why they needed this trust thing. And I agreed only because of who it was that asked me to do it. Plus, he said he'd give me another $35,000 if it's a 2-hour drive for another $35,000. I'm like, okay, why not? What the hell? So I, climb in behind the wheel of this thing, this behemoth, and here I go. I'm on this 120-mile truck across Everglades to Miami. That's Florida at its widest point. It's 125 miles. And I get to Miami, I get to Chrome Avenue, and I go past the turn where normally the people would turn and to drop their stuff off. And I go almost to Homestead, and I'm being guided by radio to making these turns here, and there's here. And I wind up in this orchard, this orange grove that's somewhere out in the middle of nowhere land. And I come across this house. It opens up into this, this house must have been some doper's idea of, his fame and fortune, like Tony Montana built that god-awful house that he built in the movie, which was fictional, but nevertheless, everybody wanted to be a Tony Montana kind of guy, in those days. But it was literally an almost identical of a English castle. It had the big spires on the corners, and it had this and the thing. It just absolutely did not belong in that orange grove, man. It was just out of this world. Only because the guy was stupid enough to have the money to build a crazy thing like this. So I pull in, I empty, I get out of the van. They start doing their thing, unloading and putting the load onto the house, and I go inside and I'm introducing myself and shit, and they're playing poker and they're drinking and they're doing coke and stuff, which I didn't. I wasn't doing any coke. I wasn't doing any drinking. I'll play, a little bit of poker with you, but I got to be straight to get home, man. So I stayed the whole day there, and I got to know these guys. And skipping forward, I drove the car back to the Everglades, and everything was cool with Daryl, and all that was kind of cool. But Between then and over the next 3 weeks comes what's called Operation Everglades #2. This was a federally funded operation that involved over 250 federal agents from every branch of law enforcement here in North America. That's ATF, which is alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. That's FBI. There's Customs. There's DEA. There's FBI, and and agencies such as those, and specialized agencies for drug interdiction and what have you. Came down to that little town. Now, this is the second year they came. First year in 1983 they came, but nobody was there. All these agents showed up and everybody was gone, only because the first and second generations had such great intelligence. Hell, they had, like I said, senators and congressmen and judges and people like that on their payroll. Well, they knew 2 weeks before they got there that they were coming. So when they showed up, nobody was there. So it was a big flop, right? It was a huge embarrassment. So 1 year to the day, here they come again in 1984. That's when the adults decided, okay, these guys aren't going to give up. So let's just sit on the front porch and, light our cigarettes and have a smoke and wait for the show to start. So they just, sat there and waited, and here they come. I mean, all these 250 plus federal agents again blocked off the road, blocked off the town, and they started effecting arrests. And that's when they started making a significant difference in the impact of what was going on. This is when now they've taken the guys who were working us kids. These were now the suspects, the more visible type of characters. But there wasn't that many of them. They still had no clue that half the town was involved. They only knew, to just a small, very, very small degree to which this was really happening. And it involved just these 5 brothers and a little bit of this and what they were doing and this and that. Well, they accumulated what they did based upon what they seized from these 5 brothers. Now, at their sentencing, prior to my taking over, at their sentencing, they're standing in front of a federal magistrate over in Miami, and that magistrate is literally reading from his list of seizures that they've got. And he's up there, and they hear the pages are flipping and turning and shit, for like 5 minutes. This guy's going through paperwork. Excuse me. And he puts the papers down, he puts his glasses down, and he looks at these 5 brothers standing there in front of him. They're all standing there waiting, and he says, to be honest with you, gentlemen, he says, I have absolutely no idea what to do with people like you. He says, I have never in my years as a magistrate ever come across anybody quite like you. He says, there are no guidelines for people like you. He says, now he's reading their list of seizures. Yeah. You have a Netherlands Antilles holding company that's worth $8 and some odd million, and it's holding numerous properties around the Caribbean. Here in the States alone, you've got houses, hotels, motels, timeshare rentals. You've got home rentals. You've got apartment rentals. You've got apartment buildings. You've got boats, planes, cars. Not only that, sir, gentlemen, he says, we've seized 580,000 pounds of marijuana from you people. And I'm thinking, who in the hell's got 500,000 pounds of shit laying around, right? Well, we do.
So when they became visible, is that when you took over?
Well,
is when the heat was on them, and then they decided, listen, it's probably best if we pass the reins to someone else.
Well, it didn't happen quite that way. Very, very similar, but not quite. What wound up happening was these guys were the brothers, the 5 brothers. Now, the 4 brothers, the older brothers, had never been in trouble in their lives. Never before they had been sentenced for, anything. The youngest brother, Craig, which today is still, they're all still my friends, but Craig is still one of my dearest friends. He was the youngest of the 5. We were closer. This would have been his second time now being sentenced for this very crime, importation. And the judge made him aware of that. So he's shuffling through the paperwork, and he says, okay, gentlemen, well, here we go. He goes, I'm just going to tell you again. He says, this is what I got. So the four brothers who had never been arrested before, federal magistrate gave him 36 months.
It always blows my mind that
two and a half fucking years.
People caught with large quantities, right, of substances often don't end up serving that much time. But people on the streets, everyday people, when
That's
they're caught
ridiculous.
with a little bit, they end up spending years sometimes.
Well, then you have the difference between the federal judicial system and the state judicial system. At those times, during those years, in those earlier years, the federal sentencing guidelines didn't provide for sentences that involved those quantities, those amounts of seizure and those amounts of just marijuana alone. And they could only go by the guidelines that were given to them, within the statutes. And that's when they got to Craig as being your second time. The magistrate looks over at Craig and he goes, let me remind you now. He goes, once again, Mr. Daniels, this is your second time. And Craig's like, he's real solemn. He's like, yes, sir, I understand. And the judge is like, once again, he says, Mr. Daniels, he says, I have no idea what to do with somebody like you. He looks him right in the eye, and I'm reading from the transcripts, and Craig's telling me this at the same time I'm interviewing him, right? He's going, Judge looked me right in the eye, and he asked me, does 5 years sound like a long time to you? Craig looks at him and goes, yo, that sounds like a hell of a long time to me, sir. Guy gives him 5 years.
Oh, no.
2.5 years, he's done. He's out. He's just good time, game time. I mean, unreal.
And I wanted to know, so how long were you doing this operation for? How long were you smuggling weed for?
Okay, up until that point, I was doing them from 79 to 84. The 84 is the time I'm telling you about now. They're being arraigned, and now they're going to go to prison. So while they're in prison, the guy that I met at that house while I was in Miami that day, who nobody had ever met except those guys that went to prison, the big dogs, George, was at that house I stayed at all day. These guys go to prison. 3 months later, I get a knock on my door. It took these guys almost a month to find a guy named Timmy in this face. They got to my door and found me and said, Timmy, we got work to do, dude. Can you do this? And I just went, yeah, hell yeah, I can do it, man. So I just went back. The infrastructure to the whole mechanism was still there. All us kids, all us guys were doing the work that the adults weren't doing. So we knew how to do it. The only thing I didn't know was where to go, who to buy from, what connections. And those are the connections that I inherited from those older generations who I had gone to go see and sought out that information. So when I did go to Colombia for that first time to meet the boss, he knew I was coming. I knew I was going to, and who we were going to meet, but we didn't know one another. The only reason that I ever got along with anybody I worked with in the Caribbean was because all our families had worked together.
For so many generations.
For so many different generations. That's why there was no violence in what it was we were doing at that level.
And how did you eventually go down? Because I know that you were arrested.
Yeah.
So can you just tell me the sequence of events that led to you serving time in prison?
Yeah, sure. I can give you a quick synopsis of that whole event.
So the sequence of events that led up to you getting arrested.
Right. Yeah. There had been when we work, my crew's always expected to show up and be sober and be ready to work because there's a lot of joviality going on within the world we live. We're kids, man. Of course, we're goofing off. We're having a time of our lives, obviously. But when it comes time to do what we needed to do, it got serious. There was no screwing around. There was no time to fart around. I mean, and even when it came time to work on the boats, the vessels that were coming to unload us and go through the islands and stuff, we had changed from what the old timers were doing. We were using what were called T-crafts and boats built by a couple of brothers in Naples, designed by us, especially for us, to do the type of work we needed to do. And the only engines that were used were 235 Evinrudes. The reason for that was because the older generations used to have their mechanics come and fix the boats and fix the engines and this kind of shit. Well, I was always under the impression that if that damn motor left you sitting, get the fuck rid of it, put a new one on there because you can afford it, and don't fix a motor that's left you sit. Why use it again? So we would take our motors, and of course you can't use brand new motors out of the box. They have to be broken in. But we knew every backwater guide there was from Everglades City to Pine Island, and every backwater guide was given a motor by us to go use and break in. When they get to so many hours, that captain, all he'd do was call the mechanic, and Sammy would send a guy to go take that motor off, and then or two guys and take that motor off and hang a new one. So all these backwater guides from Naples to Pine Island are getting all brand new motors, and we're getting motors that are already broken in. So when my guy calls and says, I got a problem with this boat, Sammy, you don't come and wrench on your boat. That's bullshit. He'll come with 2-3 guys. He'll take that piece of shit off and hang one that's brand new back on there. You know he's not going to leave you sitting. So we did our amped up and we did our thing, in that way. But I had started to do loads bigger and work with different crews. And we were using, one night I was doing 57,000 pounds of Colombian material coming in. And I was going to use 2 crews, my Everglades City crew and a Pine Island crew, which I worked before, but I had never been hands-on with. We were going to split the load between the 2 places to just make it a little bit more confusing, a little more subterfuge that way. Well, I opted to go up and work with the Pine Island crew that night. And one of the guys that had been working with us in a generational family for one of the founding families for years and years, had somehow managed to get himself in trouble in Colombia when he wasn't working with us. He was doing some cocaine deal that went south or whatever, and he got put in prison. But the U.S. government knew who he was, went down to talk to him and made him a deal and said, look, we'll get you out of this hellhole. You come back with us and work with us.
So was he working with them and ratting on you guys?
He was the guy that I was hiring to run. Remember I was talking about the chase boat that ran alongside of us? He was captaining that chase boat. So he knew right from the start where, when, how all this shit was happening. And once he knew, they knew. So here we are doing 57,000 pounds one night. I'm in the Pine Island out in the middle of bumfuck nowhere on this island that nobody's got any business being, but even the locals never go out there. The locals are the only guys that I'm working with they're the only ones that know this place that we went to existed. It was an old, worn down, grown over road that went back to a dock breaking down, almost washed away. Just enough to back a U-Haul truck down there that I was going to fill and load with shit and then drive out. So the job gets started. It's like 1, 2 in the morning, and here comes the bales, and we get, 4, 5, 6 boats, 8 boats show up. We get 100, 150 or so pieces of bales on the truck, and all of a sudden the boats stop coming. The chatter on the radio stops. Silence. A few minutes go by, and I don't want to say anything. And the guy gets on the radio, my spotter, out by the road through the woods a little ways. He goes, Timmy, he said, a car just pulled up in here. It backed out and went on, turned around and went back the way it came. He said, and I went, damn to myself. I'm thinking, that ain't right. We're out in the middle of bumbuck nowhere. There shouldn't be anybody out here, man. So I go walking out there. And as he's imparting the story again to me, I look behind me, and everybody that was with me back by the dock in the truck, they're all standing behind me because they know something ain't right. And as soon as he gets done telling me about the guy backed out and pulled, you could hear what sounded like 40 cars coming down the road, man. I mean, that tire sound on asphalt in the middle of the night. You hear that hum of the tires. And if you run this way, there's a pine tree forest that you can just haul ass and just go. But if you go this way, there's about 5 acres of what's called a palmetto field, and those little palmetto palms, they don't grow any higher than maybe 4.5 feet. There's 5 acres of them. Everybody takes off running this way, and as soon as I see the headlights of the first car start to come into view, I can just make out the headlights of the car in the front of the car itself. And what way do I go? That way toward the palmettos. I get about.
So did you leave all of the stuff there?
Yeah, fucking let them have it, man. We were all running and just trying to get the hell out of there. There's no way they could figure out who it belonged to.
And where did you run to?
I got about 25 feet into the palmettos, and that's as far as I got before that car got visible. And I crunched in and I squatted down to where they couldn't see my head. And I could see under the branches of the palmettos I'm looking at, the driver's door of this guy's Bronco, the interior light go on. I see his feet stepping on the ground, and all I can hear is cars screeching to a halt going, there's guys running over there. There's guys running over there. There's, and they're chasing, cars are screaming out of there, and they're trying to catch my guys, right? So the guy the whole time shit, I'm 25 feet away. I'm right there, but it's dark, right? And it's not too uncommon where you have a load come in that an illegal will come with it. A couple of Venezuelans or a couple of Colombians will come along for the ride, and they'll get off with a load, and they'll just disappear, you know? Well, this one Colombian guy gets off, and he runs the same ass way I do. But I stopped, and this guy gets out of his truck, and I can still hear him crunching through the fucking bushes, right? And I'm thinking to myself, dude, stop running. Because if this guy takes off after you, he's tripping over me before he gets way anywhere near you, man. So all of a sudden, I don't hear anything. I'm thinking, oh, thank God Almighty, he stopped, you know. And the guy gets in the car, and he takes off, and he leaves. And I can hear a car pull out up front and stop, and it's still running. And here he comes back in again. He pulls in, and I can tell it's the same one because it's the tan Bronco. And he gets out, same boots, same feet. He shuts the door, and now it's just starting to get light. And man, if I don't make a move, it's
because they'll start searching the surrounding area.
Dude, I'm right there. They're gonna see me.
And if the sun comes up, they'll see you.
Yeah, I'm right there. So he goes to walk back in there, and the guy in the car yells, "Hey, where you going?" He says, "I'm going to go back in and see what we got." The guy goes, "Well, wait a minute, I'll go with you." And I'm thinking, oh, this is perfect, right? And I'm also thinking, well, they go walking back. I give them enough time, and the car's still running. And I'm thinking, if there's somebody sitting in the car, one of two things is going to happen. He's going to either shoot me, he's going to have to tackle me, he's going to have to subdue me, or I'm going to knock his ass out and knock him over and keep on running, dude, and he's not going to find me, right? And I look up over, and there's nobody. I took off running, dude, and now the sun's up, and I must have ran until I couldn't breathe anymore. I dive under the bushes, and I cover myself up with all kinds of crap, and I listened there the whole day. I lay there. As soon as I realized nobody was following me, you know, I could lay there and kind of, I'm hearing the helicopters, and I'm hearing them towing my truck out of the woods and shit, you know, all that with all the weed in it and shit. And I lay there till, you know, in the afternoon, it's starting to get a little, you know, dim out, and I'm falling asleep. I'm starting to relax, and all of a sudden I'm woken up by the sound of this crackling sound of leaves and crunching. And I open my eyes up, and I see, out of the corner of my eye, I see this bobcat. And this thing's probably about 80 pounds, if it's a pound. It's a good-sized kitty cat. And it's crouched down, and it's like doing one of these things at me through the woods, because it sees my eyes and my facial movements, but it can't see me. So it's like homing in on, what the fuck is that? And I'm thinking to myself right away, dude, I spent the whole day and night getting away from the law, trying not to get caught on to get eaten by this fucking thing, right? And the only thing I could think of to do is just jump up and scream and throw the branches and the leaves and the bushes everywhere.
And it ran away.
I went like that, and this thing did 3 flips in the air, and it landed on the ground, and it took off through the bushes like it was shot out of a cannon. That was the last I saw of it.
So what happened after that happened? You went home, I'm assuming.
Well, after that, I made my way out of the woods, alongside of the woods. I walked to a fish house. It's 2:30 in the morning, and at that time of the year, or in those years, there's no cell phone. There's a lit a phone box in the parking lot. The lights are on in the fish house, which is not normal. I'm thinking, you know what, these people should have gone home a long time ago or whatever. But I'm sitting there picking the crap off of me, trying to figure out how am I going to get to that phone booth without, you know, sticking out like a sore thumb. And 2:30
Because I'm sure they
in
were
the morning.
looking for you. They probably had word that
Tim Mcbride, just the night before, people were running and shit, you know. So if I happened to be the only one in the phone booth, so it wasn't 2 minutes later, here come 2 shrimp boats pulling in and docking, and they unload their catch, and the guys on the boat go to the phone to start calling for their rides home. So I just kind of sauntered on down there and got in line with the guys on the boat. When it was my turn, I went to taxis in the phone book, and the first number I pointed to, that's the one I called. And I told that guy, I said, I don't care where the hell you're coming from. I don't care how long it takes you. I'll give you $600 cash in your lap. When you get here, just take me to Punta Gorda and get me, put me in a motel room. I'm tired of fishing. I want to go home. The guy says, you promise you're gonna be there. And while I'm on the phone, here comes a sheriff deputy through the parking lot, around me and around this empty parking lot, and he goes out this other entrance over here, and he goes down the street and takes off. Now I'm thinking, if I had to come into this phone booth and talk, and I'm standing here talking, and he drives through here, and I'm the only one here,
He's going to question
He's going
you.
to say something to me. So thank God all these people showed up. It was just a stroke of luck is how it happened. 40 minutes later, the taxi shows up. I threw $600 in his lap. I hunkered down in the back seat and said, take me to a hotel. I need to sleep.
And then, can you tell me about the day that you got arrested?
The day I was arrested, I had a friend staying at the house. The house that he was renting was being sold. So I said, come on over and hang out for a while. I got a room, plenty of room. Well, one night there's a knock on my door. It's like early, 3 in the morning or so. Bang, 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 bang. And I look out the front drapes, the curtains, and I see this one sheriff's deputy standing on the front porch, and then my dogs are barking. And Donald, he's like, he comes walking out there, and I said, answer the door, tell that asshole I'm not home. I think maybe the neighbors called about the dogs barking or some shit. He answers the door, and that guy grabbed him by the collar and threw his ass like that, throws him out into the front yard. And he says there must have been 20 guys out there dressed like ninjas. He said there was like 10 of them had guns against my head, and I can hear this shit going on because my bedroom's just down the hallway, right? And they're yelling at him, it's Tim Mcbride in that house. And he's like,
they were asking for you.
Asking for me, and he's like, yeah, he's in there. And I'm thinking to myself, oh, thanks, Donald, so fuck, here they come, and I'm laying in bed, and there's these flashlight shits going all up and down the hallway, right? I get out of bed and I look around the corner, and a guy hits me right in the face with a spotlight. And I'm like, get that fucking light out of my eyes. And he's like, get on the ground, get your hands behind your head, this and that. So I'm down. The next thing I know, 5, 6, 7 guys are tackling me. Dude, I'm in my fucking underwear. You think I was Escobar or El Chapo or fucking somebody.
Well, to them, like we said earlier, at the time you were.
Yeah, I mean, they had no idea.
Weed was seen very differently back then.
Exactly. We're put in the same class as everybody else. Regardless, I never saw, like I said, ever did I see a gun in my life, ever, growing up as kids. What parent in their right mind would put kids at risk and at danger if there was gunplay going on? No parent in their right mind would have a kid out unloading a freighter if they thought they were going to get killed doing it. That kind of thing. So I'm sitting there on my couch waiting, they searched the house, and all they had was an arrest for me. They didn't have any seizures or anything like that. Well, they go to take me out. I'm sitting there in my fucking underwear. And I'm like, dude, what the fuck? Give me clothes. I said, take me back to my room and let me get clothes. You just wait right there. This guy's telling me, this asshole. And he's like, where's your clothes? I said, well, the room where you tackled me, closet closest to the door, just open it up, slide the doors open, and there's racks of clothes, and just grab jeans and a shirt and socks, and let's go. Well, he goes in there. He's not in there 10 seconds, and I hear him saying, holy shit. And I yell back there, wrong closet, because
there's a pound of weed in there.
No, dude, he opens my closet up, and I've got these 4 by 3 foot deep by 4.5 foot tall safes.
Oh, my
6
goodness.
of them stacked in there on top of one another, $6.7 million cash.
How much?
$6.7 million in cash.
And was that all of the money that you had at the time?
No, hell no. There was more in the attic, but they never searched the attic. In my house condominium that I have in Marco Island, on the way to Marco Island, I still had, but I had to move out of there because I have so much money stuffed in the air conditioning vents that the air won't come out. So I had to buy this house. So I got this house, but they weren't there only to get me.
Yeah.
They didn't have any search warrant. And he comes back out and throws my clothes at me. And he goes, what do you got in those safes back there? And I said, well, you show me the little piece of paper that says that I have to open them for you. I'll be happy to open them for you. Well, he's like, meh, 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 because they didn't have that, right? So they take my ass and march me out of there. And it was probably 3 hours later by the time I'd been to Customs and FBI and CIA and Secret Service, because everybody wanted a piece of my ass, that I finally have an opportunity for a phone call. And who do I call first? I call my brother to go over to the house as fast as you can fucking get there and get my closet cleaned the fuck out, and then call Dennis, my attorney, and let him know what's going on, so.
What was the process? How long did the trial last? And how much time did you end up serving?
I was indicted originally 160 years mandatory to life. And I was given a $16 million fine. 4 indictments I was given, 4 counts on each indictment, each added to $1 million each. Each count was a mandatory 10 to life. There's 4 on each one. That's 16 altogether, so that's 160 years. That's the minimum they can give me. They can't give me any less than that because that's the mandatory. That's what I started out with when I was arraigned and brought before the magistrate. So I'm sitting there, and she's going through these, the seizure, the front page of the Naples Daily News, which I'll give you a copy of that you can put up, says the area part of U.S. dragnet 38 helped import over 150 tons, agents say, and 150 tons plus. Well, that over 150 tons, nearly 400,000 pounds, 3 weeks into this investigation they were doing, they didn't realize that was only a week's work. So
they didn't realize it was 30 million tons.
They had no idea,
Roughly.
The significance of what it was, the bottle of, the can of worms they'd opened up. So one thing led to another, and, in a very serendipitous way of the government going, getting around the mandatory minimum. So now the kids that are getting arrested are getting life sentences. When a year before, their fathers and uncles and grandpas and cousins and everybody like that are getting 12 months, 14 months, 13 months. And things like that. So what the government did by design rather than accident was, within this agreement, you make an agreement to cooperate with the United States government, because this is the only way you're going to get out from under a 40-year mandatory life sentence, is give us some cooperation. Well, in lieu of that cooperation, you were given immunity from prosecution from everything that you've done that will allow you to speak freely without retribution on these points. But they'll hold one count back in order to give you some sort of justice, punishment, probation, or slap on the wrist, let you go home, whatever they can do at that point. So because everybody that they were getting, and they were getting hundreds of people now, the dominoes were falling, because when they got the guy on the chase boat out of prison and he started, a couple of the younger kids on our cruise, he's like, dude, they're saying your name. This is what's up. This is what you need to do. They all went into witness protection ultimately. They were telling us, they got your names. Here we go. This is what we're doing. So when the ability to tell them what they wanted with this immunity clause came about, everybody was getting the same deal. So when it came time for, Teddy, Jimmy, and Willie, their turn, dude, they're saying your names, tell them Jimmy and Ronnie and Scott's name, because they took this deal. They have immunity from prosecution. Tell them their names, because you can't hurt them now, right? They have immunity. So everybody's telling on everybody back and forth. We're not hurting one another.
Everyone's just talking about the people that have already been arrested. Yeah.
But the government hearing the same names being said over and over is not the point. The point is, to them, is that they're getting all the right people, because they're saying all the right names.
It's like confirmation for them.
Yes. So this cooperation aspect was given to crew members and younger, and the bail handlers and the people under me. What they wanted from me was, who am I talking to in Miami, and where in the Caribbean, all over the hell and place and gone, and where am I flying? Who am I flying to see? Well, I can't tell you that. I'm sorry. Even though all the years that I grew up in this industry and did what I did, when I finally said, okay, let's take the ball and let's do some more, was there never any gunplay involved in this thing. And nobody ever threatened my life. Nobody in every country I was ever in threatened my life over this shit. It was too much money being made, and they had to understand that, but you take one of these guys and say their name and throw them under the bus, they're going to do what they're very good at. And that's find your family, find your brothers, your mothers, your cousins, your uncles, your sisters, your cousins, the dog and the cat, and get fucking rid of them. That's what they're good at. And I couldn't do that.
So how did you end up spending only 4 years?
Well, what wound up happening was, they kept taking me out of my cell. And by they, I mean the United States District Attorney investigators and the United States Treasury investigators, and questioning me and asking me about how was I able to do this all these years and not get caught. Well, I can tell you, because the game's over, but I can't tell you any names. If you can glean from any names from anything that I might be telling you, then more power to you. But I won't give you a name. So I started telling them how stupid they are. First of all, the two Treasury agents, I'm asking if they understand the geography of Everglades City. Well, yeah. Okay. How many roads are there going into the Everglades and how many roads coming out? There's one. How many roads coming from Everglades City to Miami and back is there? There's one. How do you think all those millions of pounds of pot got from that little island to Miami, man? It didn't go over there on the backs of pelicans and porpoises. It went down that one goddamn road in and one goddamn road out. And 9 times out of 10, my people are waving at you as they're going about it. You know, that's how stupid you people are. Hide in plain sight is what this is called. And we talked about that earlier. And I kept telling them about the amounts. The 1.6 million pounds in a month, the amounts of money, the money house at any one time with $200 to $300 million in cash that I would go to get paid every now and then. Call me up. It's time to get paid, Timmy. You know, come and get some cash. You know, there'd be days that I'd spend over there counting money when I should be in Colombia. Days I'm counting money when I should be unloading a boat. That's when we learned how to weigh it.
So it was your corporation ultimately that...
It was my money, my pay.
But your corporation that led them to giving you a lenient sentence.
Yeah, and what I did was, you know, they were very appreciative of the insight into my world, the judge said at my sentencing. She was very appreciative of that. But the kind of cooperation that they wanted was cooperation I wasn't willing to get, so I didn't get below the mandatory minimum. But at the same time, my $1,200,000 attorney, they couldn't cap my sentence and give me more than 20. So it was no less than 10, no more than 20. But because they respected the fact that I told them how this all worked, the invaluable way this whole mechanism worked, she decided to hit me in the middle of the road and give me the mandatory 10 years. When I wound up in prison, everybody has a job in prison. They have to work something. The job I was given when I first worked in the FCI, which is the old prison in Tallahassee, that resembles, if anybody knows the movie Shawshank Redemption.
Yeah.
Its prison looks like that. But the cells aren't gated. They're units with 175 convicts on each side in each unit, but there's 2 guys in a cubicle. And you get on the top bunk, you can see everybody in the room like that. So what wound up happening was at my sentencing, she gave me, you know, my sentence was 10 years at Federal Correctional Institution in Tallahassee, which is the hub of education within the Federal Bureau of Prison system. If you want an education, this is where you transfer to. She said, I'm sending you here because I would like you to be able to to earn the knowledge in order to make the kind of living you're accustomed to and the money that you're accustomed to making. I almost laughed right in her face. Because I'm thinking, where the hell are you going to tell me how to make $2 million a night? You know, but I'm saying this in my head, right? Well, long story short, I get to prison and my job was construction. I meet a guy in a prison yard working out, Rolando, who works in the education building, which is another compound where they have a legal library that has, you know, every convict is supposed to have access to legal material. And the people who help you through that legal material are convicts that learn the job, you know, so I don't want to build a prison. I want to work there. So long story short, I become a clerk in the law library. Rolando and I take a correspondence course through the University of Honolulu, and I get a degree in law. And I get a degree in how to shepherdize law, how to work my way through it and find, you know, similar cases that are citing similar case law, because it's precedent law here in the United States. You do something that is parallel to what I'm doing, you can't get more time than me, or I can't get more time than you. It has to be equal. So this is what I learned how to do. And Dennis, the head of the law library who hired me, was a writer in his own right. He's the one I learned how to integrate the sights and the sounds and the smells into the writing that I did when I wrote the book Salt Water Cowboy. And through the work I did in the law library, I learned what their true definition of cooperation was, what the legal definition is. And I was sitting in front of the legal dictionary that defines legalese, whether you're a prosecutor or a defense attorney, and it's Latin, and I'm running through and I come across the word cooperation. And that definition basically says if I give you something, if you ask me for something and I give it to you, I have essentially cooperated with you. Well, they asked me how I did all of this shit. I told them. They asked me for my fine that they wanted in money. I gave it to them. So I've essentially, by that definition, cooperated with them. So I wrote my own brief to the Middle Districts of Florida based on that definition of cooperation. And under their role of cooperation, my sentence went from 10 years to 4. It took me 3.5 years to get it there, and now I'm 6 months short by the time she reads this and agrees that, okay, 4 years.
I also wanted to know, just to end off, how much money were you, and you don't have to answer this, of course, but were you able to keep any of the money you made during those years?
Not a dime.
They seized everything.
Everything. There were several houses throughout the Caribbean that I just abandoned, that I never went back to, that I could care less about now. Money I was going through like water because I was looking at life, possibly life in prison. What do I need? What good is this money to me or anybody if I'm in prison for life? So I just went hog freaking wild, doing the most outrageous stuff a guy could do with money, like buy a car from a dealership, from a friend of mine who owns a dealership, pay for the car in cash, have a buddy come in the next day and test drive this car with that particular salesman that I know, take the car out on a test drive and beat the living shit out of it and drive it back while it's not falling apart and park it back in the parking lot and get out of it. Only to be standing there to have the salesman look at me and see me standing there and just start cussing me out when I can hear his voice cussing me out, and shit. And he just trashed a brand new IROC Camaro because I bought it. So this guy could have the ride of his life. I mean, just get rid of him. I mean,
You're just getting rid of it all.
Just buy 7, 8 Jeeps. Buddy of mine's, we buy 8 Jeeps and we take these.
Surely those were seized as well, though.
Yeah, yeah. We take the Jeeps. We buy 8 of them because they're under 10 grand. We buy them and we take them. We leave our cars in the parking lot right there at the Jeep dealership. We take them out to a place called Bad Luck Prairie, and we have one of the badass bumper car shows you've ever seen in your life, man, with these brand new Jeeps. And we fuck them up to the point where there's one still in good enough shape to get us back into town. We park it back at the dealership, get in our cars and drive home.
Just to end off, I want to know, I know we've mentioned it, but can you just tell people where they can find your book and the name of it?
Absolutely. The name of the book is Salt Water Cowboy, The Rise and Fall of a Marijuana Empire. And we'll put up a picture of the book. It's available on Amazon. If it's available through Amazon in the country in which you are in now, which it is in most places, and a lot of bookstores, in your town, will be happy to go ahead and purchase the book for you as well. The first edition hardcover copies are very rare and very difficult to find now, and very expensive. I just saw one person selling it for almost $255 for a first edition copy.
And how many copies have you sold?
I couldn't tell you.
A lot.
Okay, amazing. Enough for the book is now in its second printing, which is a paperback printing of the book, but it's everything the hardcover is, except it doesn't have a hardcover. It has a paperback cover. And it's just one of those popular reads. In every review, 133 now, I think, on Amazon, whereby each one of them says practically the same thing about being able to, put the book up, pick the book up, but not being able to put it down again.
Amazing.
Until I finished it, and that's, as a writer, nothing is more satisfying to an author than to have your work turn out exactly how you intended.
Well, that's exactly how I feel with the podcast. I don't think people realize, but when you say how much you appreciate, because a lot of work goes into it.
Yes.
It really does mean a lot. It doesn't just fly over your head.
No. I understand the concept and how it works and what it takes to produce and make something like this an excellent platform for somebody like me to springboard from, and I'm sure you're going to get, you're going to do really, really well in because you're really good at what you do.
Thank you.
And your questions are relevant, and like I said, we're kicking back here in my living room, just chilling, and I'm smoking a little weed myself, but
just a little bit.
This is my life, and this is how I grew up, and the way you see me now is the way you'll always see me if you meet me in person. You can find me on Instagram at Original Saltwater Cowboy. You can find me on Facebook, Timothy Mcbride, Saltwater Cowboy. You can Google my name, Tim Mcbride /Everglades, and all the podcasts and all the newsreel, all the stories, the little clip I did with Viceland, which has now got around the world some close to 100+ million views
On all platforms.
on all different platforms. I've got 12 million viewers of that platform in Australia, 4 million in New Zealand, 3 million in the Philippines. I mean, the story's getting around, man.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Josh, I can't believe you're here, dude.
I know, me neither.
This has really been cool.
Yeah, no, it's been awesome, and I've loved sitting here at your house. And like you say, you are very much exactly like you are on camera and off camera.
Come on by, man.
So thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Wide Awake podcast. Please go get yourself a copy of that book, and I'll see you all very soon.
Love
Cheers.
ya. Peace out.